In this video, you're going to be setting up your machine to work with Prisma. Now, as I mentioned in the last video, there is a separate installation video for each operating system. This video is for my Windows users. If you're working on a Mac, the last video was for you. If you're working on Ubuntu, the next video is for you. So if you're still watching, I am going to assume that you're on Windows. And for the moment, we're going to stick with the Mac screen recording. And a little bit later, in about 3 minutes, we'll switch over to Windows when we have to perform some Windows-specific things. All right, my Windows users, let's go ahead and set up our machines for Prisma. The first thing I'd like to do is get us set up with a database, and the database we're going to be using is Postgres. Postgres is an SQL database, and it pairs really well with GraphQL. SQL databases in general pair really well with GraphQL, because with GraphQL, you have to be explicit about the exact fields and type definitions for those fields, making it an easy match. Later on in the course, I will show you how to set up Prisma with MongoDB if that's your cup of tea. Honestly, any database you can pick works, because in the end of the day, Prisma abstracts that database away anyways. For now though, let's go ahead and grab Postgres, heading over to Heroku.com. Now there are plenty of places where you can get a Postgres database, and you do not have to use Heroku. I use Heroku because they have a free tier for what we're about to do, so you actually don't need to pay in order to get a basic database up and running for your sample application. So take a moment to log in if you have an account and sign up if you don't. I'm going to go ahead and log into my existing account. And once we're in, we should see a dashboard. Now, if you're creating your new account, it's likely going to send you through some new customer flow where it asks you to create an app. And that's good because it's exactly what we're going to do. I'm going to create a new application, and we're going to give it a name. I'm going to start with my last name in all lowercase letters. Now there's no spaces allowed, so I will use hyphens to separate my words. That is Mead-Prisma-Dev server. Awesome. Now we don't need to touch the region. You likely have a default region good for your location around the world. You could customize it to Europe if you wanted to, but since I am in the US, I'll stick with that. And I'm not going to touch the pipeline at all. All we're going to do is create the application, and once the application is created, it's going to bring us to a set of steps describing how we can start to deploy things. Now there are plenty of features for Heroku that we're actually not going to need in this class. We really only need a very small subset of them, and we can get started by heading to the Overview tab for our application. What we're concerned about is installing add-ons. There's one for a Postgres database. So let's head over to the Configure Add-ons page, and from here we can search all of the available add-ons. You want to search for Heroku Postgres. Now there is a free tier for that, so once we click on Heroku Postgres, it's going to allow us to pick the option we want, everything from free to $12,000 a month. Let's go ahead and start with that free plan. I am going to provision this, which is going to create the database. And once the database is created, we're going to be able to click that in our add-ons list. It's going to bring us over to the page where we can learn a little bit more about our database. One important thing we need from here are the credentials that allow us to connect to this database. You can find those over in the Settings tab. Right here, we have the database credentials area, and we can view our credentials. This is the information that we're going to need to connect to this newly created database from the outside world. Now we're over on my Windows machine, and what we're going to do is install the next tool we need. This one is pgadmin, and this is a Postgres database GUI. It's a tool that's going to allow us to connect to our database and manage our data. So we'll be able to create data, update data, delete data, and read all of our data in an Excel-like table. It's a fantastic companion when working with Postgres. So sure, our code is going to connect to the database, and it is going to read and write to the database, but it's also nice to have this GUI so we can track how our data is changing over time. We can find this tool and install it by heading over to pgadmin.org. Here we can go to the Downloads page, and we can find the download for our operating system, which is Windows, and we can just grab the latest release. You don't need to match up with my version. You can grab the latest version available. So I'm going to go ahead and download version 3.2 by grabbing the exe right here. Now take some time to download the file so we don't have to watch and sit here while I download the file. I've actually downloaded it in advance. I have the exe file that would get downloaded right here, and all we're going to do is install it. So if your file is downloaded, we can run through the installer together. Right here, it's one of those click next installers, so we don't have to do anything fancy. We don't have to run any commands. All we have to do is agree to their terms, pick a destination for our installation. We can go ahead and actually create a shortcut if we want to, and then it just confirms our options and we run the installer. Now, once this is done, we're going to run pgadmin. That is going to allow us to connect to our database. So what we're going to do is provide these credentials to pgadmin so it can actually make this connection securely. From there, we'll just make sure that the connection is all set up. Then we'll be done with pgadmin for the moment, and we'll continue to use it as we progress through the course. In the background, the installer is almost done. I'm going to go ahead and cut the video to when the installer is complete. Welcome back. The installer is complete. I'm going to go ahead and launch pgadmin 4. Right here, the tool is starting up, and in the end of the day, what's going to happen is that it is going to crack open a browser tab, and that's where we're going to interact with the tool itself. All we're going to do is copy those credentials over so we can actually connect to the database. So let's take a quick moment to let this tool start up, then we'll come back together. Right here, we have our new tab for the pgadmin application, and now on the left-hand side, we have a list of all of the servers that we've set up connections for, and currently you can see there are none. So before we can actually do anything with this tool, we have to go ahead and create a brand new server. So right here, we have to provide some details. In the name field, we're going to go ahead and pick a name for this. It can be whatever you'd like. I'm going to use something like Heroku PG as an example. Then we have to move over to the connection tab, and this is where we provide all of the connection details we have over inside of our Heroku dashboard. The first thing I'm going to do is grab the host value, copying that to the clipboard and bringing it over to pgadmin. We're going to paste it in right here. Next up is the port. That is the value 5432. That's the default Postgres port, and you can see it's used over here as well, so there's no need to change anything. Next up, we have our database itself. I'm going to copy this to the clipboard. Then over here, I'm going to paste that in under maintenance database. After that, we have username and password. We have both of those over here. I'm going to grab the user. I'm going to bring that over and paste it in, and I'm also going to grab the password. So let's take a moment to grab that password, copy it to the clipboard, paste it in, and I am going to choose to check the Save Password button so I don't have to re-enter the password every single time I want to connect. Now we're actually done. We can go ahead and save this connection, and it's going to test the connection, and right over here, we can now actually expand that server. We can view our database by expanding databases, and the first thing you'll notice is that there is way more than just our database. There are actually maybe a couple thousand different databases running on this server. Now that doesn't mean we can actually access them. If I were to try to expand one of these other databases with a little red mark, what do I get? I get an error saying that I do not have permission to connect to that database, and that's a good thing. Now we have a really long list of databases here, and it can be a burden to scroll through and find yours. So what I like to do is just copy the database name to the clipboard, then use Control F to bring up my search on page. I paste that database value in, and it shows it right here. Here we can see this database shown in gold is something we can connect to, and if I expand it, we're going to be able to dive in to exactly what that database contains. Now this is actually where we're going to stop with pgadmin for the moment. Once we actually get Prisma set up, we'll dive into here and explore our data. But for now, there's actually nothing in here worth looking at. Though we do have pgadmin set up and connecting to the database, which is a fantastic first step. There is just one more thing we have to grab before we're done with this video, and that is a tool called Docker. We can find that by cracking open a new tab and heading over to docker.com. If you've never used or worked with Docker before, that's perfectly fine. We're going to be using a very small amount of Docker in this class. Docker can be a complex tool in the whole DevOps space, and there are literally entire Udemy courses that just cover Docker. We don't need to worry about all of that. We're using a very, very small subset of its features. Now, what is Docker? Well, it's part of this whole containerization and virtual machine movement. So if I'm building up an application, I have my application code and I have my dependencies. Let's say I need to run on Linux and I also need Git and Node.js installed. Now I have a couple of options. I could choose to allow people who want to run the application to actually install all of those things. Then I could cross my fingers and hope it works on their environment, or I can bundle it all up into a container. The container, which in essence is a little virtual machine, can then be executed from anywhere Docker is supported, and the good news is that Docker is supported pretty much everywhere. Whether it's Mac, Linux, or Windows, you can run Docker containers regardless of what tools or dependencies they need. You don't have to slow down and install a whole bunch of stuff on your machine for every application. Instead, you just run the container. It's very easy to stop containers, to delete them, and to free up all of that space without trying to remember all of the dependencies you had to install. It's just a better way to manage apps. Now, there are two sides to Docker. There is the person creating the application and creating the container, and there's the person who's using the container to run the application. That's the side we're on. So we're not going to learn about the ins and outs of Docker, because in reality, we're just a user of Docker trying to run a container provided by somebody else. Let's go ahead and download and install this tool. We can find it by heading over to the Get Started button. If that button has been moved for some reason, you can just go to docker.com/get started. And if I scroll down under the Developer tab, we have our Download for Windows button. Now, there are a few different versions of Docker. For Windows, we want the Docker Toolbox. There's a link to that right over here on the right-hand side. The Docker Toolbox is going to allow us to do exactly what we want to do, which is use it as the dependency for Prisma. Perfect. Now, we do have to go ahead and actually download and install this. So let's go ahead and do just that. If I scroll down on this page, we can grab the Windows installation. This is going to download an exe, and to save us all a bunch of time, I've downloaded this ahead of time. So take a moment to allow that download to finish, then come back and click play, and we'll go through the installation process. All right, at this point, I am going to assume you have Docker Toolbox downloaded. All we need to do is give that a double click to start the installation process. Much like we saw with pgadmin, this is going to be one of those click next type installers. We need to pick the location to install the tool. We want to leave all of the options at their default. So here we are installing everything, which is good. Then from there, we're going to leave the next page's options as default as well. Finally, it's going to ask us to confirm everything, which we will, and now it's going to run through the installation process. Once Docker is actually installed, to wrap up the video, we're just going to run it and make sure that it's running correctly. As long as it's running correctly, then we'll be able to be done with this video and continue on to the next one, actually setting up and using Prisma. From here, I just have to confirm that I want to install everything, and that should wrap up the installation process. Right here, it's all done. Perfect. Let's go ahead and click Finish. That is going to wrap up the installation, and we're going to go ahead and actually start up Docker. Now right here, we can see we have a couple of options. We want to double-click Docker Quick Start Terminal. This is going to crack open a terminal style window, and it is going to start up the Docker application. And this is something that we're going to leave running in the background for as long as we're using Docker. Now, if you restart your machine, you can always just start up the Docker Quick Start Terminal again to get Docker up and running once again. But once again, it is important to leave this window running as we progress through the course. Now, on initial booting, it's going to take about 30 seconds for it to go through the process. And once the process is complete, you'll know because it's going to show you a big message in green. So we're just going to wait here for a couple of moments, clicking yes to confirm that we do actually want to set up Docker the way that Docker wants to set itself up. And once this is done, we'll be done. All right, here we are. This is what we are looking for. This is the screen that lets us know that Docker started up successfully. And right here, it's showing us the local IP address where Docker can be used. It's important to keep this screen up and make note of this address because you, as Windows users, are going to need to use this a bit later on. So that's it for this video. We have 3 things set up. We created a brand new Postgres database using Heroku. That's where all of our data is going to be stored for our local development app as well as our real-world production application. We also installed pgadmin, which is going to allow us to interact with our database from a GUI. And finally, we installed Docker, which is what's going to let us run the Prisma application. All right, that is it for the Windows-specific installation video. The next video is for our Linux users, so you can go ahead and skip that video and jump right back into the rest of the course. I'll see you there.